Imagine for a second that you wake up tomorrow and the ATM doesn't work. You go to the bank and the doors are locked. You check your phone and the news says the United States government has run out of money. Not budget cuts money. I mean, zero. Empty pockets. There is no Federal Reserve. There is no stimulus check. There is no plan. This sounds like the plot of a post-apocalyptic movie, but in 1907, this was real life. The entire American economy was a house of cards, and someone had just bumped the table. As the country prepared to slide into a second Great Depression, the government didn't step in to save the day. They couldn't. Instead, the fate of every single American's bank account rested in the hands of one man, a man with a massive mustache, a terrifying temper, and more power than the president. His name was J.P. Morgan, and he was about to pull off the most legendary high-stakes boss move in the history of capitalism. But before we get to the secret library and the locked doors, we have to understand how a couple of greedy guys tried to cheat the system and accidentally set the world on fire. To understand 1907, you have to understand trusts. Think of a trust like a VIP snack club. In a normal bank, there are strict rules. You put your money in, the bank keeps some, and they lend some out. But a trust was like the cool, rebellious younger brother of a bank. They had fewer rules, they took bigger risks, and they promised way higher returns. By 1907, these trusts were booming. Everyone was pouring their life savings into them because, hey, more money is better, right? Well, here is the first twist. The biggest financial crisis in history didn't start with a bank. It started with copper. Meet Augustus Heinze. He was a wealthy guy who thought he was the smartest person in the room. He hatched a plan to corner the copper market. Imagine there are only 100 apples in the world. If you buy 99 of them, you can charge whatever you want for that last apple. That was Heinze's plan, but with copper. He borrowed millions of dollars from a bank, the Mercantile National Bank, to buy up every share of a copper company. He thought he could force everyone else to buy from him at a massive price, but he messed up the math. The plan failed spectacularly. The stock price didn't go up. It teleported to zero. Heinze was ruined. But here's the problem. Because Heinze had used the bank's money to gamble, the public realized the bank was now empty. People didn't just walk to the bank. They ran. This is what we call a bank run. Imagine you and all your friends realize the snack club leader ate all the cookies. You all show up at once demanding your cookies back. But the cookies are gone. The Mercantile National Bank collapsed. And that was just the first domino. You see, in 1907, all these banks and trusts were interconnected like a giant spider web. When the Mercantile fell, people started looking at the other snack clubs and wondering, wait, is my money safe? The eyes of the public turned toward the biggest, most prestigious club in town, the Knickerbocker Trust. It was the gold standard of trusts. If the Knickerbocker was okay, everyone was okay. But the president of the Knickerbocker had been seen hanging out with Heinze, the copper guy. That was all it took. One rumor. One spark. On Tuesday morning, a line of people stretched around the block of the Knickerbocker. They weren't there to deposit money. They were there to get out. In less than 3 hours, the Knickerbocker paid out $8 million in cash. Then the vaults went dry. They hung a sign on the door, closed. This is the second twist. When the Knickerbocker fell, it didn't just scare people in New York. It triggered a literal financial zombie outbreak. Because there was no Federal Reserve back then, there was no one to print more money. If a bank ran out of cash, it died. Period. People across America panicked. They started digging holes in their backyards to bury their cash. They stopped buying things. They stopped paying bills. The gears of the world's largest economy just stopped turning. The stock exchange began to plummet. Healthy companies were seeing their value erased in minutes. By Thursday, the city of New York itself was 48 hours away from being unable to pay its teachers and firefighters. The United States was essentially going bankrupt. Enter the man with the mustache, J.P. Morgan. At this point, Morgan was 70 years old and semi-retired. He was at a church convention in Virginia when he got the news. He didn't wait for a phone call from the president. He just got on his private train and headed to New York. Morgan wasn't a nice guy. He was a predator. But he realized that if the whole ship sank, his gold sank with it. When he arrived, he didn't go to the government. He went to his private library, a massive marble fortress filled with rare books and art. He sat in his chair, lit a cigar, and waited. Here is the third twist. The U.S. Secretary of the Treasury actually traveled to New York to meet Morgan. Think about that. The guy in charge of the country's money went to a private citizen's house to ask for help. The secretary basically admitted, "We don't have enough money to stop this." What do we do? Morgan's answer was cold. The government needs to give me their money, and I'll decide where it goes. And they did it. The U.S. Treasury deposited $25 million, an insane amount of money back then, into banks that Morgan chose. Morgan became the temporary king of America. He sat in his library playing solitaire while the most powerful bankers in the world waited in the hallway like nervous schoolboys. He would call them in one by one, look at their books, and decide if they lived or died. If he thought a bank was run by idiots, he let it fail. If he thought it was important, he saved it. But the fire was spreading faster than he could pour water on it. By Friday, the president of the New York Stock Exchange rushed into Morgan's office. He told Morgan that the exchange had to close early. If it stayed open for even another hour, every single broker would go bust. Morgan looked at his watch. He told the man, "If you close the exchange early, it will cause a panic that will destroy the world. Keep it open." "But we have no money," the man cried. Morgan didn't blink. He called the heads of the biggest banks and told them they had 10 minutes to raise $25 million. He told them that if they didn't, he would personally make sure they were ruined. They found the money in 5 minutes. The stock exchange stayed open. The world survived one more day. But then came the weekend. And this is where the story gets legendary. Morgan realized that Monday morning would bring a new wave of panic. There was one specific firm, Moore and Schley, that was about to collapse. If they went down, they would drag the whole market with them. They needed another $25 million. But the banks were tired. They were scared. They didn't want to lend any more money. So, Morgan invited the 12 most powerful bankers in America to his library for a meeting on Saturday night. They walked in, thinking they were there for a chat. Here is the fourth twist. As soon as the last banker walked in, Morgan's guards locked the front doors. They literally locked the bankers inside the building. Morgan told them, "None of you are leaving this room until we have a plan to save the market." He then walked into another room to play solitaire. He let them sit there. For hours. He let them argue. He let them get tired. He let them get hungry. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Morgan walked back in with a piece of paper. It was a contract stating that every bank in the room would chip in to create a massive rescue fund. One of the bankers refused to sign. Morgan walked over to him, put the pen in his hand, and said, "There's the paper, and there's the pen. Sign it." The banker signed. By 5 a.m., the deal was done. The doors were unlocked. The bankers stumbled out into the morning light, having just saved the American economy because a 70-year-old man bullied them into it. But Morgan wasn't done. He had one more trick up his sleeve, and it's the most controversial part of the story. While everyone was panicking about the Moore and Schley collapse, Morgan realized he could solve the problem by having his own company, U.S. Steel, buy a smaller rival company that Moore and Schley owned. This would give the firm the cash they needed to survive. But there was a catch. Buying that company would create a monopoly, which was illegal. J.P. Morgan needed the president's permission to break the law. Here is the fifth twist. Morgan sent a messenger to the White House to see President Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt was famous for being a trust buster. He hated monopolies. But Morgan's messenger told him, if you don't let this merger happen, the entire economy will collapse by noon today. Roosevelt had a choice: uphold the law or save the country. He chose the country. He gave Morgan the green light. Morgan had used a national crisis to legally buy out his biggest competitor and grow even richer. To some, he was a hero. To others, he was a puppet master who had just staged a coup. The panic ended. The money returned to the banks. The mustache king had won. But this leads us to the final and most important twist of all. When the dust settled, the American public wasn't grateful. They were terrified. They looked at what had happened and realized that the entire United States of America was basically a one-man show. If J.P. Morgan had been in a bad mood, or if he had died of a heart attack that weekend, the country would have ceased to function. The government realized they could never let a private citizen have that much power again. They realized that the snack club system was too dangerous. So, 3 years later, a group of bankers, inspired by the 1907 crisis, snuck off to a place called Jekyll Island to write a new set of rules. Those rules became the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The Federal Reserve, the giant bank for banks that controls your interest rates and the value of your dollar today, wasn't created by a bunch of geniuses who wanted to help the poor. It was created because J.P. Morgan was so good at his job that he scared the government into replacing him with a machine. So the next time you look at a dollar bill, remember 1907. Remember the copper gamble that failed, the bankers locked in a library, and the man with the mustache who saved America, just so he could own it. The system we have today wasn't built for stability. It was built because we realized that depending on one person to save us is the biggest risk of all.